It was 4 hours one-on-one every day with this mangaka who doesn't speak English. And one of the things that I learned was I've always been drawing something that looks like manga. And it actually has conventions and rules. And not knowing that, I was just drawing characters with big eyes and pointy chins. Post-war period, Tezuka started taking things from American cinema and film, made manga look like you're watching a movie. And this is sort of the historical development of the form.
Thanks for joining us on Unpacking Japan, proudly produced by our team at Zen Studio with the long-standing support of Zen Group. To keep these weekly stories coming, please consider subscribing. It's the best way to support the show and really makes a difference. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today I have the pleasure to welcome Kofi to the studio. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're one of those guests that probably had one of the longer journeys to come here because you're actually based in New York,
yes.
Where you're a professor of Japanese manga, the first one in the United States. Mm-hmm. And you have also your own manga that you're working on, Azuki.
That's correct.
And I'm very curious to hear more about your journey and how you came to be the first professor of Japanese manga in the States. That's quite a unique journey, I imagine. But I think it kind of begins away from manga and with sports, because you used to be a professional boxer.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about kind of how these two tie together and how you got interested into Japan and manga?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess I have to start early. So I grew up in a kung fu school, training in Chinese kung fu. I was actually there before I could walk because my father is a 4th degree black belt in Shaolin Kung Fu. So that was first sort of being steeped in East Asian culture and learning about stories like the Monkey King and stuff like that, which ended up becoming my first tattoo. And that was first my interest in fighting. Then I moved on to wrestling and mixed martial arts, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And when I was 19, I found the boxing gym. And that's what I've been doing since then.
So 19 for starting a sports is kind of late to get into the professional side of things. Most professional athletes start young and kind of really go and dive deep into to this. What clicked with boxing that didn't so much with all the others that you went through?
I loved all of them, to be honest. That's a really interesting question. I think in terms of boxing, it was a little bit more cultural and the type of music that I heard in the gym that made me relate to it a little bit more. Actually, there was a lot more like in wrestling and in mixed martial arts, there was a lot more rock music, which I do like rock music. But when I went into the boxing gym, I was like, oh, wow, I'm training to hip hop for the first time. And it's like, that's the kind of music I listen to at home. So I really felt that connection. And I really do see boxing as a martial art. I love it stylistically so much. And it's a lot of fun. But I like all the combat sports.
Interesting that it's the music that in the training environment, the music specifically that kind of clicked.
Yeah.
You get into boxing at 19 and then you kind of professionalize. But to go back to your childhood, you started actually mostly with East Asian martial arts. Right. Did you grow an interest in the countries and the cultures and maybe in Japan as well? Or was it purely focused on the combat sports?
It in a weird way, it developed naturally. So along with training in Chinese Kung Fu, I was so young, I was there since I was a baby. I didn't really have a concept of what a country was or what other countries were. And what's interesting, actually, this was my first sort of experience in cultural exchange. I learned years later that actually the grandmaster of the school we were in is Korean. So Song's Kung Fu Academy. And when we're like doing our forms and doing our counting, I thought we were counting in Chinese, but we were actually counting in Korean. And it was very, very interesting to learn that I was learning a Chinese martial art from a Korean grandmaster. It sort of gradually developed my understanding that, all these things I'm interested in, all this media, all these video games, this thing that I love called anime, it's from this region called Asia. I had no idea. So I first, in terms of manga, it was the anime Dragon Ball Z, which I saw when I was like 5 years old. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, yep, I'm going to do that for the rest of my life. So I started drawing right away. I didn't know what manga was. I didn't know what comics were. I just know I was watching these cartoons. There was something different from the other cartoons. And I was just drawing scenes on paper. And then my parents started buying me manga. So actually my first interaction with art and my first interaction with comics was Japanese manga. I didn't read any American comics like Spider-Man or anything like that until I was in middle school.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was kind of like accident and natural in a weird way. It wasn't really intentional.
But still very early on, the interest for the image and
Yeah.
kind of how it's done and
Right.
what is unique about it, and you starting to draw them. That's kind of
Very early. Yeah. And then the video games, I didn't know, but I realized at some point in high school, all the video games I play are from Japan. And yeah, so it was just kind of natural.
So when you're in high school, you kind of leaning towards boxing, professionalizing into that. You've had this decade-long interest in manga and anime, drawing them. When do you start taking that seriously? That idea of I want to become a professional mangaka or do something related to that?
You know, that was really late. So the main thing that I used to get in trouble for in school was drawing manga in class. I used to get my drawings confiscated all the time. And I never took any art classes, and I never really had this concept of this is something that I could actually do as a career or professional. It's just my favorite thing to do. It's always been my favorite thing to do. I'll have like a ruler and a pencil and a sheet of paper, like as my teacher is giving lectures or whatever, and I'm hearing, but I'm drawing. It's just always my favorite thing. I didn't actually decide that like I'm going to take this manga thing seriously and turn into a career until I was 26, when I was a college dropout working another dead end temp job. And I just didn't have any money. And I was like, I might as well pursue my favorite thing and try to figure it out.
It's an interesting starting point when you are actually without a degree and in a job that you don't necessarily like, to decide you're going to try something like the arts to make a living. Usually people would maybe turn towards something that is let's call it more stable or more secure.
Yeah.
So when walk me through that time when you're kind of out of college, unsure of what your professional future might look like, and you actually decide to go for manga. Like, where does your path start there? I
didn't have career or professional aspirations. I've been vibing for most of my life. Like I have ADHD. And in a way, that's a superpower. One, it's very, very difficult for me to focus on or take seriously things that I don't like. So that was some of the struggles in school. But for things that I am interested in, I can pour my whole self into it. So when I turned 18, I went to the University of Illinois. I had a full ride. But then at the same time, I got really into MMA and I got really into fighting. And I started a fight club. It was very illegal, but we would like put on MMA gloves and we would fight, and that led to me being recruited by a mixed martial arts gym, and I had my first fight. And this is at the same time I started college, and fighting was I just stopped. I just didn't go to class. I was just I started training with a bunch of professional athletes and competing and taking that seriously, and that's sort of like for most of my adult life, I've been training and traveling to compete and fighting, and then just sort of like enjoying drawing and working like terrible low-wage jobs and taking piecemeal courses in community college that piqued my interest. I didn't really have a direction. I was just doing things that I liked for a really, really long time. Then I'm 26 and it's like, I still don't have any money. And it's like, I got to do something. So I could have decided to do something that maybe is more lucrative, but I wouldn't have been able to pour myself into it. And I'm like, I'm broke already. I might as well just lean into the thing that I really like to do. So that was my thinking. Throughout all those years that you were interested in these various martial arts, a lot of them coming from Asia, and you kind of being interested in anime and manga, had you ever considered maybe going to Japan or going abroad as part of your university where you were still enrolled at the time? I imagine, as you said earlier, when you were young, you didn't really realize what the concept of a country is and where these are on the map. But when you're in university, you probably have more understanding of, the manga, they're from Japan, and Taekwondo is from Korea, and Kung Fu is from China, and so on. Did you think about moving to Asia or trying or getting a scholarship or study abroad? Or? At the time, I was so locked in on boxing and my like immediate life, like having to work sometimes 2 jobs and training and just what I was doing. I didn't really travel very much, even around the United States. I was just in my hometown for most of my adult life. So I didn't actually know what study abroad was. I didn't even realize that I could major in art at the time. And I dropped out in the first year. So and it's surprising. I'm actually, my GPA was a 0.5, which most people don't realize you can do. It was very, very low. I didn't know, I wasn't really thinking about school. I wasn't really thinking about a major. I was in school because my parents wanted me to. It's not what I wanted to do, which is funny. I'm a professor now, but I wasn't really interested in school. So I wasn't thinking about traveling to another. I was just thinking about fighting, honestly.
Just thinking about fighting until fighting became something maybe less sustainable, and then you pivoted towards the arts.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I was still doing both at the same time. So I didn't turn professional. So I was fighting as an amateur for a long time, but I turned professional the same year I started graduate school. So I've been doing them at the same time. Yeah.
When you decide to focus and dedicate yourself more to manga, at that time you realize it's an art form, it's a type of drawing that is more popular in Japan, less so in the United States. What do you decide to do when you decide to focus? Do you try to make your own stories get published as a mangaka? Do you try to design and make illustrations and sell them to maybe a licensed manga that would use an extra illustrator? How do you approach this?
So I've always been drawing my own stories. And most artists can tell you this, especially most people who are comic artists or aspiring comic artists. It was just a bunch of unfinished projects. I've been drawing manga since I was 5 years old, and I didn't really have anything to show for it. And I decided, because after I dropped out, by the way, I should tell you, I started studying Japanese when I was 19. And that was kind of on a whim, because I dropped out of college and my parents were like, well, you still got to do something. So I went to community college and my dad said, you like that anime stuff? Why don't you take Japanese? And I took that class and I was like, oh my God, I really like this class. And I started getting straight A's, even though I was failing all of my other stuff. I was really into Japanese. So fast forward to when I'm 26, I'm competing in boxing, I'm working, I'm like kind of drawing. But I want something more in my life. So I decided to just focus on what I'm good at. So I got back into my Japanese studies, and that led me to make the decision to go to Japan for the first time. So I was working a temp job. I worked a lot of hours. I saved up $5,000 and I quit my job and I went to Fukuoka for a month. And that was in 2017. That was my first time in Japan. And at that time, I found a private language school called Wahaha Japanese Language School. It was awesome. And the reason why I went there is they had a special instructor who was a mangaka who was teaching a course on manga storytelling. So I enrolled specifically to go there. And I also, I found a professional boxing gym in the area. So I was there for a month. I was studying Japanese language intensely. I already had about intermediate level because I did 2 years in community college, like years before, and a lot of self-study. So I'm in Fukuoka, I'm studying Japanese, and I'm taking this course on manga, but it's sort of like a course that people can take on a rolling basis. And the time that I was there in that summer, nobody else was signed up for the course. So it was 4 hours, one-on-one every day with this mangaka who doesn't speak English. So my Japanese shot up. I just had a dictionary on my phone every day as we're talking, and he's teaching me. And one of the things that I learned was, I've always been drawing something that looks like manga, and it actually has conventions and rules and a storytelling structure. And taking that course for a month, I learned all about the manga storytelling structure. Then at the same time, I'm training at this boxing gym where nobody speaks English, and my Japanese level shot through the roof. I learned most of my Japanese from boxers, actually, because they don't speak English. Yeah, it's the whole immersion thing.
So it kind of all came together in that 1 month in Fukuoka, in a way.
Yeah.
You said a few interesting things there, among which you've always been drawing something that looks like manga.
Right.
But as that professor taught you, there are conventions, there are rules and such. What are some of these kind of basic things that maybe your drawings didn't match, that basically disqualified it from being a proper manga, so to say? Yeah. What are some of these key rules to keep in mind?
So the big thing that I learned when I took that course is there's a storytelling structure that was adapted originally from ancient Chinese poetry. It's used in essays in Japan, and it is the backbone of manga storytelling. It's called Kisho Tenketsu. It's a 4-arc structure. So this is how you structure the plot, like the things that happen. Kisho Tenketsu is intro, development, twist, and conclusion, which differs from the Western structure, which is more so intro, conflict resolution, where in Kisho Tenketsu, the plot is built around this twist or something that's unexpected, or the reader, the audience, is introduced to a new perspective. And that is a core aspect of manga storytelling. And not knowing that, I was just drawing characters with big eyes and pointy chins, which there's an aesthetic quality that's related to Japanese manga. But one thing that I learned, it doesn't matter what style you draw in, as long as you follow the conventions, such as following Kisho Tenketsu, there's such a wide array of styles. If you look at Japanese manga, you look at somebody who does like really realistic works like Shinichi Sakamoto, or you can look at more sort of like traditional cartoony styles like Masashi Kishimoto Naruto or like Akira Toriyama. There's a lot of different aesthetic styles, but they all follow the Kisho Tenketsu structure.
So the storytelling structure is what really maybe then also differentiates Japanese manga from an American comic, so to say, the Marvels and the likes. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And one thing I will say, so I have these lectures on like the history of manga and the idiosyncrasies of the form. And one thing, like as an academic, it's important to define terms, but as sort of a cultural specialist and as an artist, I don't really like the idea of locking things into a box and having really, really hard definitions. Just when you teach, you have to have something that you can like anchor yourself to. But to be honest, if you really want to see the differences between, for example, American comics and Japanese manga, it's better if you look in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, because now, you know, we live in a global society and things kind of converge. You know, you see a lot of these manga elements in American comics and vice versa. So I say all these things about the idiosyncrasies of manga and the things that make it unique, but also we live in such a global society. Stylistically, things are sort of everywhere and everything's a big amalgamation now.
When you're in that room with that professor 4 hours a day, just you and him, you up until that point have like, I don't know, 20 years of drawing these or copying the illustrations and such. I imagine in those 20 years being kind of self-taught, you build a lot of habits, maybe some habits that are not that good according to a professor of manga. What are some of these things that he pointed out about your style and your drawing that you kind of had to unlearn and relearn to adapt a little bit?
You know, what's interesting is he didn't focus on sort of like dexterity or drawing skill. That course was all about storytelling and structure. It was all storytelling. It was a course about Kisho Tenketsu. And something interesting, so manga is mostly taught in vocational training schools, not in universities. And if you take a course on manga at a university or at a vocational school, one of your first assignments is going to be something called a yonkoma manga. Right, so yon means 4 and koma means panel. So a 4-panel manga, which is the embodiment of the Kisho Tenketsu structure. So all of my assignments were yonkoma manga. And he didn't really care about how well I was drawing or the style. It was just as long as I was following the structure. And he taught me some of the history of the form as well.
So 4-panel manga, is that basically 4 pages?
Nope, just 4 panels. 1 page, 4 pictures. An entire story and only 4 pictures. So that's actually the first assignment. My students in my manga course, they have to do a yonkoma manga. It's their very first assignment.
So 4 images for 1 story. When you kind of reduce it to something so simple, what are some of the key elements that you have to then focus on to convey the story? Because you cannot use so much dialogue, I imagine.
I know, exactly.
You can only do that many facial expressions. What do the stories really revolve around?
So the easiest thing for a very short story, a lot of people lean into gag manga, comedy. You can do something dramatic, you can do something sad, you can do action, but usually it's comedy or some kind of like nichijo, everyday sort of life thing. That's usually it can be any genre. But what's really, really important is clarity and simplicity. You can't tell a sprawling story with multiple arcs. You really have to, when you tell a short story, because of the structure, because of the limiting structure, there's only certain type of things that you can do.
You only have 1 month. All of this happens in 1 month. The training at boxing gym, the classes with him, and that kind of gives you a new perspective on manga.
Absolutely.
When you fly home from that, you spent your $5,000 that you've saved up. What do you think about at that time? You kind of went to Japan for the first time. You relearned something that you've been doing kind of unbeknownst to you for so many years. You go back to the States. Where's your mind at?
It was such a fantastic experience. It was my first international experience. I really hadn't been outside of my hometown very much. So that was a really, really big deal. I decided I was going to go back to school. So along with that, beforehand, I was a volunteer conversation partner for a really long time. I was very steeped in the international community in my hometown, which is very vibrant international community at the University of Illinois, really big international student population. So I had a lot of friends from a lot of different countries. And actually my very first conversation partner as a part of this volunteer program I was in, a guy named Ko Inada, who lived in Japan. And after he went back, when I went to Japan, I actually stayed with him. So I got to stay for free. At the time, he was a researcher at Kyushu University. He's a scientist. And he brought me to the university. I met some professors. I met some other grad students and had some great conversations. And I was like, wait, I'm just as smart as these people. They have degrees and I don't. I really need to go back to school and take this seriously. And my initial idea was like, I just got to get back to Japan. That was such a fantastic experience. However, I get there, I got to go to Japan. So my first thing on my mind was I'm going to become an English teacher. You know, that's mostly what people do. So I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to be a manga professor. Of course, I was thinking I'm going to draw manga, but I want to teach English. And then while I'm there, learn more about manga and draw it. So I was like, first thing I got to do is go back to school. So I went back to community college, but I had so many F's on my transcript, because I didn't know that you can withdraw from courses. So when I'm not interested in a course, I would just leave. And I did that for like 8 years. So I had to spend about 1.5 years in community college just getting straight A's so I could get my GPA up to a 2.0 so I could transfer to a 4-year university. And my whole idea was get a degree, doesn't matter what it is, just get a degree and get a job teaching English in Japan. Then once I'm in Japan, I can do all my stuff. So I was like, why not major in studio art? I might as well. I know I'm just going to be an English teacher, so I might as well major in the thing that I like, thing that I'm good at. And I transferred to Eastern Illinois University. And while I'm there, I just realized I might as well do the art thing. You know, I do like teaching, nothing against English teachers, but that's not my calling. I like to make art. So I gradually shifted my focus. And because I had learned this stuff about Kisho Tenketsu and Yonkoma manga, at the same time when I go back to school, I joined the Japanese Culture Club and become president there. And I start teaching workshops on the stuff that I learned, which this isn't anything you can learn anywhere around the United States. So those workshops, they started like maybe 5 people or 10 people would show up and I would do it for free. Then I moved to the next university and I started the Japanese Culture Club there. Then I started getting invited to teach these workshops. And this is sort of how the teaching thing started to build. First at libraries, then other universities would invite me. Then I got into graduate school and started traveling back to Japan. And this is kind of how like the talks and lectures started.
And one thing led to another, and suddenly you're a professor and you're teaching this full time.
At
a university instead.
Yeah.
When you start going to university and you study more in the arts, and you kind of have that knowledge from your experience in Japan as well about manga and the story structure, do you start looking at your own work and also the work of other mangaka differently? When you pick up suddenly the Dragon Ball you were reading as a kid, you look at the book differently because of how the story is structured, how the illustrations are done. Did that kind of change your perspective?
Well, I never really thought about rules. And then I started to think about conventions and a form and what's the difference between Japanese manga versus other comics. I never really cared too much about that or thought about that. So then I started analyzing works and I got really, really interested in analyzing, which helps with teaching a lot. And one thing I'll say is something that I found when I finally got into art class. I didn't get into my first art class. I was 28. You know, I went back to school super late. So I'm taking studio art courses. And one thing that I learned is when you take art in university in the United States, it's not just art. It's Western European art, very specifically. It's a rather narrow focus. Comics are still not very well respected in academia across universities across the board. Manga even less so. So I got a ton of negative feedback.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. From my professors. It's something I still deal with now.
Because of the art type you were engaging with not being kind of the commonly taught ones.
Yeah, comics, but then it's also non-Western, so that's even worse. And it's not that people would explicitly say like, oh, this is non-Western, I don't like it, but I'm fairly certain that's what it was. So I got a lot of pushback about drawing manga.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I imagine that's not too long ago.
Yeah, 2018.
So
is when I started.
Yeah,
went
less
back
than
to
10
school.
years ago.
Yeah.
At that time, manga were still already known worldwide and
Yeah.
a respected kind of
Yeah.
genre in itself. What were some of the points that people would criticize about that art that you kind of pushed back against in a way because you are now the professor in the field?
Well, aesthetically, generally, again, manga doesn't have a specific style, which is something that I think a lot of art educators still don't have a grasp of. The big eye, pointy chin thing, the fact that it's not realistic, I think is a big issue for a lot of really, really traditional sort of like fine arts painters, sculptors, and artists.
But then you'd have someone like Picasso doing a lot of abstract work
I know,
as well,
right?
or Miro, or
Yeah,
Dali doing some.
But what's interesting is, here's something that's very interesting. So contemporary art is about 100 years old. And this idea that art can be anything, that concept is only about 100 years old. It wasn't always that art can be anything. Art used to be, you look at the Renaissance era, people were commissioned, they were in ateliers, it was very strict, it had to be realistic. The idea of art being anything, or like taping a banana to a wall or putting a toilet upside down, Duchamp, is only about 100 years old. But what's interesting, what I found on this journey is, even though contemporary art sort of claims to be open and it can be anything, it's only open to certain non-conventional things. So within this idea of being unconventional, it still has to be a very specific path. And something like cartooning or something like manga, which is off the path, but still has very specific limitations and rules, is just something that's so out of left field that I think it can be very difficult for people to sort of contend with it. Or, to be honest, to give people the benefit of the doubt, it can be hard to, how can you guide a student in an art form that you don't understand?
So you tried to understand that art form. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you started being more analytical about some of the works. Which are some of the manga that you really kind of started diving into to try to understand better how they were done and that you kind of use as a reference point for you to basically work through university?
The big one that I got really interested in, so it started with Toriyama Akira sensei's Dragon Ball. But really in 2017, 2018, I got really into Urasawa Naoki sensei. I read Monster for the first time, which is really, really incredible. That actually taught me that manga can be very serious. It doesn't have to be funny. It doesn't have to be, people flying in the air, shooting fireballs and stuff. That's just like a mystery thriller that really, really outstanding work. So, and I started watching, he has a really awesome documentary series called Manben. It's manga and benkyo put together, which I highly recommend. And basically it's him interviewing really, really legendary mangaka like, Chiba Tetsuya sensei and Sakamoto Shinichi. And you get to watch them work and they talk about their craft and they talk about the philosophy behind their work. So there's so many things that I've like sort of absorbed from that. And I got really, really into the idea of manga as its own form.
For people that are not familiar, what is the general plot of Monsters?
Monster is about a man named Dr. Tenma, who is a Japanese brain surgeon, he's like the best brain surgeon. And it takes place in Germany when they're still in East-West Germany, post-World War II. And it's not a big spoiler because it happens right at the beginning. He gets framed for a murder that he didn't commit. And he's a guy who really always follows the rules, really has a strong sense of righteousness. But he gets framed for a murder unjustly. And I'm trying to do this without spoilers, but the murder that took place, in a way, he takes the blame for, and it's his fault. So there's all these questions about morality, what's really good and what's really bad. And there's a person who has a really strong moral character, a really strong basic sense of right and wrong. And all of a sudden he's a fugitive on the run in a foreign country.
So when you discovered that story, what made it particularly interesting for you from an academic perspective to kind of go into also for your own learning? You mentioned that it taught you that manga can be very serious too.
That it can be anything. That it's a form and a vehicle to tell any type of story. That it doesn't have to be a specific type of story. That it's a way to channel your creative energy. That's kind of what that taught me.
Is it in a way, because earlier from your experience in Fukuoka, you explained how important, what really defines manga is kind of the structure of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And now again, how important the story is, more than the illustration itself, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
that nearly falls more into the literary academia
Sure.
field rather
Yeah.
than kind of the art, so to say, the illustration side of things.
Yeah. Another thing that I'll say, though, something that's really important in manga as a form, which Neil Cohn, who is a pretty prominent manga scholar, wrote about this and talks about this very well. Manga uses abstract elements in like the background and around characters to demonstrate things like thoughts, movement, action, states of being. For example, speed lines, speed lines like that. So those aren't things that exist in the actual space around the characters. It's just for the audience to get the idea of things moving. Speed lines, for example, these are things that were introduced by Manga no Kami-sama, the god of manga, Osamu Tezuka, in the post-war period, who really changed manga into the current modern form. So that is another important aspect of manga, is it uses these abstract visuals to communicate. Also, another really important thing, Japanese manga is an imitation of film.
Oh.
Manga is meant to look like a movie. And that came from Tezuka, who was very, very inspired by Disney and American cinema. So another thing that's interesting is manga would not exist without Western influence. So it is at once a very uniquely Japanese thing, but also a product of sort of cultural amalgamation. So comics came to Japan in the 1860s in Yokohama. There was an English comic artist by the name of Charles Wergman. And the very first comics magazine in Japan, in Yokohama, was by this Englishman. Mm-hmm. And he brought in this sort of English, European cartoonist sort of political humor sensibilities into Japan. And we didn't really get the first professional Japanese cartoonist until the early 1900s, Rakuten Kitazawa. And this was the first time that somebody used the term manga to mean comics.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So manga, that term was coined in late 1700s by an artist by the name of Santo Kyoden. It did not mean comics at the time. The term actually means whimsical pictures. And you can trace the history back to a really, really old Emaki scroll called Choju Jinbutsugiga, which is a bunch of like frogs and rabbits and monkeys just kind of like frolicking and doing stuff. So this is some of the idiosyncrasies of the form come from this sort of playful whimsicality. And then you combine that with Western comics, like comics magazine influence. And then in the 1900s, you get that first professional cartoonist where it was still very flat. Rakuten Kitazawa's work still looked very European at the time. Then in post-war period, Tezuka started taking things from American cinema and film, and he made manga look like you're watching a movie. And this is sort of the historical development of the form.
All that history is very briefly condensed here. I imagine not very known in academic circles in the States. You start diving into this when you're kind of going through your university, learning the techniques, but also seeing that there's a lot going on behind there.
Yeah, did a ton of independent studies.
So how do you kind of bring all of that together to convince the teachers against that had some pushback against your work to kind of, okay, here's an art form.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. You're going to pursue this further and for them to kind of maybe change their minds?
Well, one, I went back to school when I was 28 and I wasn't a kid and I knew what I wanted to do. And coming from a background as a boxer, I developed a lot of confidence through martial arts and through fighting and competing. So when I decide what I want to do, nobody can tell me otherwise. I've been broke before. You can't do anything to me. So I didn't listen. And I took as many opportunities as possible to ally myself with certain faculty so I could do independent studies. And one thing I'll say, my favorite art professor of all time, Professor Chi, she was amazing. Very, very traditional artist in sort of like the Western aesthetic. I won her over because I was the hardest worker in the class. So my idea is, if you don't believe in what I do, I'm going to work hard enough to the point where it's undeniable. So that was my thinking. Kind of, I took like boxing mentality into how I approach academia and the way I make my work.
At the time, you were also saying that you wanted to go back to Japan, get your degree, go back to and teach in Japan and learn manga there. But you started running the Japanese club and you started pushing through your studies. At what point does your mindset shift towards, or actually, maybe I can become a professor of this? If nobody's doing this in the States, maybe I can be the one to really teach people about manga and include the history, the art, the storytelling, and more.
I think my first big sort of lecture workshop, I was still in undergrad. I was 28 or 29. I had like 100 people come. And people really liked my workshops. I got really, really good feedback. And people kept saying, oh, you're a great teacher. You're a great teacher. And I didn't realize that I was good at teaching. But both of my parents are educators. So I think it kind of came naturally. It's so funny. I hated school. I didn't want to go to school, but since I was very little, my mom was like, you're going to be a teacher. And it still happened somehow.
So you start having your first workshops and people come. What do you see? What are they interested in? Because you kind of first connected with anime and manga when you saw it on TV and Dragon Ball and such. But now you're in an academic field or at university and other students in their 20s. Gravitating towards your workshops. What was their interest? What did they want to learn?
One thing I'll say, the workshops were all ages. I had kids, adults much older than me. I always make them public and open. And I always try to do 1 or 2 free ones every year. So there was a wide range in audience. There are people who were really, really into manga. A lot of kids who are really into manga. So of course, all ages love manga. But probably about half of my audience are people who didn't know anything about it, but they keep hearing about it and they know that it's popular. So on the one hand, people who are very interested in this art form, but they don't have any opportunity to study or learn anything about it because there isn't really information or lessons available in English. So of course, they're gonna register for it. Like, oh yeah, I love it. I'm gonna register for this. And then there's people who's like, what's this strange art form I keep hearing my kids talk about? So then parents are coming, and and
suddenly you've got 100 people from different ages here for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very diverse audience in the workshops.
Do you then quickly realize that it's very difficult to just do like a broad workshop for everyone that kind of covers manga, and that you need to start kind of breaking this up into, let's say, courses?
Yeah, you know what's interesting? So my the main workshop that I do is actually the Yonkoma workshop. So I give a little bit of historical background, talk about the idiosyncrasies. Then I introduce the Kisho Tenketsu storytelling structure, which is always really amazing to people. Most people really haven't heard of it. And the workshop is for people who can draw or they can't draw. Everybody can do it because it's a storytelling workshop. And I tell them, it doesn't matter how good your work looks. You can even do stick figures as long as you're following the structure. That's what makes it a manga. So it's really, really accessible to beginners and to more advanced people. So I think that's why the workshop connects so well. And I got it down to like a tight 60 to 90 minutes. So yeah.
So with all these people and the positive feedback coming from it, you start thinking, well, maybe I can actually turn this into a career.
Yeah. Because there's a need. There's nobody who teaches it. I always just wanted to study manga in a classroom. I that's like always the thing that I wanted to do. And there's so many other people that I've met that I've wanted to do that. And then I just realized that's my job to figure that out.
With you trying to establish a course then and becoming the professor in the United States, but still coming back and forth to Japan, you explained earlier that in Japan, it's not really taught at university either. It's taught at these...
there's about 20 universities with a manga program now. It's growing, but there's like over 100 of the vocational schools.
So the Semmongakko, right?
Exactly.
The 2-year vocational school, and then people become... usually they start working for the big studios, I imagine, and they produce there.
Right.
How do you see things being taught in the US and things being taught here when it comes specifically to manga? Are you trying to take things from what you've experienced in Japan and bring that to the United States? Or do you see a need for a different kind of education because the cultural context that manga is being taught in is very different? That's
a really great question. And I'm glad that you asked that. So one, I want to take a step back. You're talking about cultural context. Let's talk about the word manga. In Japan, manga just means comics. So people don't differentiate. Manga means like this Japanese thing. If they want to talk about Japanese manga, they'll say Nihon no manga. In other languages, manga takes on this new context as being something separate from comics. But in Japan, the word for comics is manga. So I appreciate you asking that because context does change things. And yes, I am teaching my students this Japanese form. I'm bringing them to Japan to study at a manga no Semmongakko. But I really want them to lean in and figure out their own thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to take this form, to borrow from this form and create something new. So this is something I call like a cultural innovation. You could take, like from music, for example, somebody like Nujabes, right? This sort of like chill hop. That's taking an established form and presenting it or developing it in a new context, and it becomes something different. Or another example from fighting, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Do you know the story about how that developed? No. So you know what it is?
Well, it's a kind of grappling kind of based martial arts.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So Jiu-Jitsu is a Japanese form. The Gracie family is a Brazilian family who are all Jiu-Jitsuka. And I think it's Helio Gracie was his name. The patriarch of the Gracie family, this is a long time ago, had a heart condition. He had a very weak body. So Jiu-Jitsu is a very hard style. Judo and Jiu-Jitsu is the same thing. You know, Jiu-Jitsu's technique, Do is just like Wei. That's when it's the sport form. So there's a lot of throwing and you got to be really strong. The patriarch of the Gracie family, because of his condition, because he wasn't powerful, he had to take these techniques and adapt them to use leverage and like joint locks. So with his new sort of stylistic twist on Jiu-Jitsu, and it's only on the ground, a smaller, weaker person can defeat a larger, stronger person because he adapted these techniques to use body leverage instead. Then the Gracie family created a tournament where they put out a call to all the martial artists around the world so they could figure out what is the ultimate martial art, and they called it the Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC. The Gracie family created UFC, the family that created Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Royce Gracie represented the Gracie family, and he won the entire tournament, UFC 1 and UFC 2. Martial artists from all over the world, no holds barred competition. Back then, there were almost no rules. There was no time limit. They were just fighting. And Royce Gracie came out as the champion and established Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as the premier martial art around the world, the most practical martial art around the world. And the only way this could have developed I even say this as a boxer. I think if you want to learn how to defend yourself, you should learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu first. The most practical martial art came out from taking a cultural form and adapting it in innovation in a new context. So that's why I think cultural exchange can be powerful, because we get new art and we get innovation and we get new things.
And so taking this kind of concept of manga and the teachings from that, but adapting it to the students in the United States.
Yeah.
What do you see come out of this when you are now with your students in class and you're teaching them some of the basics, and you see the work that they put out, which for all of them comes with like the growing up in the States, very different visual environment than growing up in Japan.
The sensibilities are different, and you can feel it when you read the stories. Their perspective is different because they were born in the States or wherever they were born. You know, one of my students is from Brazil. He's based in the States now, but his story is different. Let's see. The main differences that I see, I guess, to get really specific, a lot of things that I've seen with my students in the United States and their works, a lot of them are talking about gender. A lot of them are being really critical about society in ways that I don't really see happening in Japanese manga. Not that it doesn't happen, but I don't see it as much. It really feels like it's from an American perspective, but it is imbued with this sort of logic and structure and framework use of Japanese manga. So it's really easy to tell, even though I translate all my students' works into Japanese and they're good at drawing, so it looks like manga. But when you read it, you can still feel culturally that it's a bit different. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's something that should be celebrated.
Do you sometimes then, I imagine you here in Japan right now, because you're bringing some of your students to Japan for a couple of weeks to have some workshops here.
Yep.
When you bring their stories to a Japanese audience and get them to interact, what do you kind of see? What are the Japanese mangaka or the Japanese professors or the Japanese students interested in those stories from your American students?
You know, it's still early. So I ran this program for the first time last year, and this is the second program. So in terms of the feedback that I get, it's still been pretty surface level. Like, people are really, you know what's funny? There's a lot of people who say like, oh, if you're not Japanese, you can't draw manga. I've only ever heard that from non-Japanese people. every time I show Japanese people, especially people in the manga industry, they love it. And they love the idea that it's coming from a new perspective. So most of the feedback that I've gotten is that it's very clearly work made by Americans, but they love the fact that it's an innovation and it's something new. And one of the biggest advices that I've gotten was back in 2019. At the time, I was still drawing manga. I was still copying this idea of like content from Japan, right? I was doing like samurai stories and stuff like that. And really, really great feedback that I got from an editor at Kodansha who was looking at my work. He told me, I want to see a story from you. Japanese people already see Japanese stories all the time. We want to see something unique from you. So I think there's a huge demand even here in the manga industry here for more diverse voices because there's more stories.
I was actually going to follow up about this. So you mentioned the editor from Kodansha, the big publishing company, giving you that feedback. For stories that are in a different cultural context, so you gave example of stories talking about gender or social issues that are maybe specific to the United States. And you translate them to Japanese and you then from a publisher's perspective try to sell them to Japanese audience. How does that work? Because then a lot of the cultural context or the social problems or the perspectives on genders are quite different. How do you bring that to the audience so that
I don't think everything needs to be explained. So perfect example, Japanese manga does great in the United States and we don't get all the cultural context all the time, but it still works. I think, you know what's funny? Early on, if you look at manga in like the early 90s or like the late 80s, when you look at translated manga from Japanese to English, for example, that's the only other language I speak, so I don't know the others, but a lot of it was edited to make it more palatable to a Western audience. Sometimes they would even flip it. So, you know, in Japanese mangas traditionally right to left, they would flip the artwork and make it left to right. Or for example, Akira, really, really groundbreaking work. When it got introduced to the West, they hired a colorist and they colored the entire thing because they didn't think Westerners could handle a black and white comic.
Wow.
Yeah. Which I think all this is really bad. So there was a point early on when manga really started to come over to the States where I don't know if it was I don't know how it works. Whatever companies were making these decisions, they thought that I guess we couldn't handle the raw manga from Japan. But if you look at it now, it's not really localized in any way. It's just really a Japanese object, an item. And it's the most popular comics form. It's one of the most popular art forms in the world. So I don't think you need to adjust things to make them palatable for a foreign audience. I think if you make something good, people will like it.
So for you now as a professor, have you seen the kind of, from an academic perspective, the interest grow and the field becoming more accepted among the field of academia?
I don't know about the field becoming more accepted yet. I think we still got a lot of work to do. You know, what's interesting, I love my job. My job is awesome. But I came on specifically to teach manga in my second year now. And one thing that I learned, and this is across the board, I've seen this at other universities, but now seeing internally how this works, I got tasked with reviewing portfolios and applications of high school students that are applying to the university. And one of the rules in the portfolios were no anime styled art. And that was very, very interesting. And I flagged that. And thankfully, I talked to my chair, I talked to my directors, I talked to the deans, and they were really open. And sometimes you have to do some explaining because it's an art form that people don't understand. And usually when people don't understand something, they think it's bad. The problem ended up being, the reason why they banned that is kids are copying anime all the time.
So they copy the exact panels.
Yeah, they're literally just copying drawings because, it's super popular and kids that like drawing, a lot of them get into it just like I did through anime and they're copying. Because of me, we changed the rule to, instead of no anime styled artwork, it's a no copying. So I had to do a little bit of explaining, and I had to explain that this is racist and in some ways sort of a facet of white supremacy. There's no such thing as anime styled art. Like I said before, it's not one style. You can look at many different artists and see very, very different diverse ways of drawing. What it is the Asian illustrative aesthetic. Because, it's not just manga, the big eye, pointy chin thing that, look, you've been in the train stations. You see it in advertisements. You see it in all kinds of illustrations. You see it on signs. So I had to do a little bit of teaching and explain that this isn't just an anime or manga style form. You're blocking an aesthetic style from an entire region of the world. And people are really receptive to that. But that's only at the place that I work at, right?
So I feel that's still very new.
Yeah.
You mentioned that one of the things you wanted to change is no copying, to kind of push students to do original work.
Right.
And up until now, we actually haven't talked much about your own original work. And I think that kind of is a good point to tie everything together, because we talked a lot early on about your martial arts career, if I can say that, or your upbringing in the field. Then we talked about how manga took the lead, and now your personal work is how you kind of combine both a little bit in a manga that is called Azuki.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about this project that you're doing, kind of basically outside of academia? I imagine it's your own kind of
You know, it's interesting. I talked to the first time I went to Japan when I took that manga course. So we're doing I had to do all these Yonkoma manga, which it was just single page, 4 images using the Kisho Tenketsu structure. My final project in that course, I had to adapt Kisho Tenketsu to a 16-page work. So apply those concepts, but then expand it. So the first 4 pages are the intro. The second 4 pages are development. Third 4 are the twist. The last 4 are the conclusion. But then within that, each block of 4, I would do Kisho Tenketsu, Kisho Tenketsu, Kisho Tenketsu. Very mathematical and very, very interesting experience in sort of constructing a narrative. You know, when you're writing fiction, it's not the same as absorbing fiction. Nathaniel Hawthorne, really, really famous classical author, once said, "Easy reading is damned hard writing." I tell my students that all the time. So that was a really, really interesting experience. And my final project in that course was Azuki. That's where I came up with the idea. It was just this, it was this little girl who was competing in a rock, paper, scissors tournament that looked like a martial arts tournament. And she only played scissors every single time. And she just kept winning. And then she won the tournament. It was like a little 16-page thing. And the reason why I chose that story is really arbitrary. It's really stupid. Rock, paper, scissors. Mm-hmm. Whenever I play rock, paper, scissors, and I'll tell people this before we play, I tell them, I'm only going to play scissors. And I only play scissors every time I play. And the reason why is there's no way to have any sort of strategy in rock, paper, scissors. And you never gamble over anything important when you play rock, paper, scissors. So I don't care if I win. I don't care if I lose. But I really like the idea of being resolute in my decision, which is something that comes from martial arts, being confident in what I'm doing, and this idea of mastering a single technique, something that came from Bruce Lee, who said, I don't fear the man who practiced 10,000 kicks. I fear the man who practiced one kick 10,000 times, something like that. So I took that martial arts philosophy and my idea of only using scissors every single time, and I created this character who, in a world where rock, paper, scissors is considered a serious martial art, she only plays one single technique every time, and she wins for really stupid reasons. It's an action comedy.
It's kind of interesting to imagine that the person's just going to do scissors, but you still have the doubt. Is she going to change
exactly
the next time? And then you end up
I have a really, really over-the-top, ridiculous, there's an opponent that she plays against in the tournament in the book, who his name is Kei-san, which is kind of a play on words. He's a mathematician, and Kei-san means to calculate, but it's also K and then san, little language joke. He is like the most intelligent mathematician in the world. He's won all these awards and stuff like that, and he believes everything can be broken down into an equation. And he saw that this girl only played scissors every single time, and he made up some stupid math equation that there's some 0.0001% chance that she'll play scissors. She couldn't possibly do it again. And he has this really long sort of like villain monologue about how he knows everything. And he's like, so I'm going to play paper. And then she just plays scissors again. So she wins for really, really stupid reasons. It's like totally absurd.
So that story, Azuki, is your project that you've kind of finalized then? Is it a project that you've then decided to expand upon and kind of draw out a little bit?
Yeah, so I did that final project. And I really liked it. So then when I went back into undergrad, I decided to redraw it and color it. And I packaged it into a little 16-page children's book that also doubled as a way to teach the format of Kisho Tenketsu, because it's mathematically 16 pages, and then each of those blocks of 4 are divided. So I started pairing that with my workshops and introducing it. And I did a couple of Azuki books. And then I decided I want to make this like an actual graphic novel. Mm-hmm. So I created a pitch and I drew some pages for it, came up with the story. I wrote the whole story from start to end for a 250-page graphic novel.
Wow.
And I started reaching out last year to find an agent so I can find a publisher. And I got an agent this year. And now we're working on the pitch so we can find a publisher. So that's where we're at now.
So are you then basically trying to take the manga storytelling format and apply that now to, let's say, a more Western type graphic novel, like
that's
a more
exactly
long form?
Yeah. So I'm doing it in English. I'm doing it in color, and it's left to right. So it has the bones and the DNA of manga for a Western audience. What I'm trying to do is I want this work to embody a sort of cross-cultural exchange.
Mm-hmm. So now that you have an agent and you work on a publisher, do you have any idea of kind of when people can maybe hopefully expect, or when you would like to see this released? In
2 years, 2028. It's a lot of pages. Yeah, it's like 250 plus pages. So
when people start out with manga and you start them out with these like 1 page for illustration kind of challenges, now 250 pages. How does that change your approach to the storytelling, to the illustration, to what you include and what you exclude from the story?
So I really like structure. And when you're creating fiction, I really love setting up these barriers and limitations to sort of guide, right? It's kind of like bowling with those little, with the gutters. That's the way that I look at the Kisho Tenketsu structure. So, rules are made to be broken, but I think it's important to follow the rule. And I use that as a guide. So it's something, it works for Yonkoma manga, but also a whole chapter has that Kisho Tenketsu structure, where in the 3rd act, there's something unexpected. There's some kind of twist. A whole book uses that structure. So I've just expanded that structure. So each chapter uses it, and then the entire story together uses it as well.
So when you approach the story of Azuki, do you look at the starting and the ending, so to say, and you kind of then fill out everything in the middle to kind of meet the structural requirements that you have?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So like when you have other people looking at your work, and when you have to complete something with a set like page count, it takes a lot of what's the word? Not resistance, resilience, and effort to contain something. Right? I think one of the hardest things about writing and creating is omitting good ideas. Because you can have too many good ideas, but if it doesn't serve the story overall as like a cohesive object, you have to take that out. So that's been the biggest sort of learning curve and challenge. And that's what's been the most interesting, is trying to keep things in the story that serve the story. And some things that I really, really love, trying not to be too married to ideas and getting rid of things that don't work.
Now that you're a professor, you're working on your own thing. Do you still kind of work together with a mentor, a manga teacher here in Japan that you kind of correspond with? Your first teacher, maybe in Fukuoka, that you kind of still run the updates on Azuki by? Or
so what's interesting, so the place where I created this program, I bring my students to this manga school called Nihon Manga Juku, and shout out to them. So they are the one manga school in Japan that has the most percentage of graduates that go on to actually become professional mangaka. So a really established place. The woman who did Cells at Work, she graduated from there, for example. They, along with, I'm doing some independent research, along with bringing my students there. I'm doing some independent research, using my research funds from my job, actually. They are helping to train me to be a better manga teacher. And they are also giving me feedback on Azuki. So I'm making Azuki in English, but I'm translating all the pages to Japanese, and I'm sending them to them also.
Where does that leave you now in the United States? Now that there's an official program at the university and you've got students enrolled and such, it's still predominantly an art form kind of here in Japan, or to maybe a large extent in East Asia, with also Hangwon in Korea. What are the kind of prospects? What are the students looking for? Are they mostly taking courses? Do they want to become professional mangaka in the United States? Or what are the kind of opportunities they can kind of look forward to?
Yeah, so a part of this program actually that we created with Nihon Manga Group, since they're getting a part of the program is they all get a one-on-one meeting with an editor from Kodansha, and I hired an interpreter that they can talk with them through the interpreter. Yeah, that's a part of the program. Nobody at the school speaks English, by the way. So the whole thing is we had to hire an interpreter also who's going to be there every day working with the students. After they finish the program, they have some opportunities. So if their work is really good, then and it fits with Kodansha, of course, because every magazine is different. They can have an opportunity to publish. Nihon Manga Jugu, they also have an in-house publishing called Triumph Comics, and outstanding students will also have an opportunity to work directly with Triumph Comics directly out of this program.
So for people that are enrolling in the classes and also coming to join this program, potential opportunities to become published somehow or work with editors?
Immediately, yeah. And there's an exclusive competition that they offer. There's a competition to get feedback from editors and to possibly get published, and also to receive a cash prize that's only open to people who have studied at Nihon Manga Juku. And all of my students that I bring each year get access to that competition as well. So actually last year, 2 of my students from last year applied to that competition, and one made it all the way to the finals.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what would you like people to know that are interested in manga? Maybe like your younger self that kind of had that dream already as a child. I'm going to do something with it. And that are maybe now considering this more seriously while living in the West. Yeah. What should they know about the study of manga, making a manga, and kind of what it takes to potentially become a published author?
One important thing I think to keep in mind with manga and comics in general, and sometimes more broadly art, is a lot of artists, even if you're very, very good, are broke and don't make a lot of money. How much money you make in a lot of ways has nothing to do with how good you are, how skillful you are. In terms of being an artist, something that I found a lot of these soft skills and how to talk to people, how to network, how to communicate, how to reach out, and how to be proactive is extremely important to getting ahead. You can be very, very, very good at drawing, very good at storytelling, and not have a good career. Or you can be not so good at making art, but you can be very good at talking with people and connecting and have a fantastic career. This is general to artists. Learn how to send emails, learn how to smile when you talk to people, learn how to ask questions, learn how to take feedback, learn the soft skills. I think that's super important in general.
Where does that leave you now with your career and where you're taking things? You've had a few clear turning points in your life from starting to become a professional boxer at 19 to changing everything at 26 in a way and refocusing on manga to becoming a teacher, a professor at university, and now on the way to publish a full graphic novel. Yeah. Where are you at? What are you kind of looking forward to? What do you dream about now with your pursuit of manga?
I'm really, really excited about the story I'm making right now. I can't wait to have a book that I did. It's been such a long time coming, and I feel like I'm late. I know it's not good to think like that, but a lot of artists have those sort of self-doubt things. I'm really, really excited about the story that I'm doing. And I mean, I have the idea for 3 more books and a spin-off card game. And another thing that I like to do is some of my projects when I was in graduate school was reimagining manga in new context. So I always think about cultural context and cultural exchange, but I also thought about expanding that more broadly. So another thing that I do along with drawing manga is I create really big exhibitions of my work.
Wow.
So another work that I did, which is completely different from Azuki, that is very, very sort of action drama, very sort of critical of US empire and all that stuff. Very different story. I did a huge immersive exhibition as my final project in graduate school. So I took manga pages and blew them up to 10 feet and put them on, and I filled up an entire gallery wall and had them all printed out on vinyl. And I followed up on that exhibition. I did another one where I took over the entire library of my job, and it was a $4,000 project where I took huge prints, and it's a story about robot-human relationships. And I also learned how to train some AI chatbots so they could talk with the audience, and did some world building and text. And I studied under a theoretical physicist, and I used that to teach science. So I also expand out into sort of like working on immersive exhibitions, like imagine a gallery as a manga. So I'm also trying to expand the definition of what it can be, along with making this book.
That's super interesting. It's like a very modern approach to kind of bringing this art form and introducing it to people that are maybe not at all in the field and have no interest in it whatsoever, but that immersive experience walking through a library. Wow.
Well, you know where it came from? It was an accident. So I was really, really frustrated when I was in school because there was always this push to do like the Western thing, but I'm doing this very specific thing. But when I was in graduate school, so I did, I went to University of Illinois for graduate school, and I was, there's no manga program. So I took a program in new media. And actually the reason, I did new media, so I love that program, by the way, no knock against the program, but they kind of leave you alone and you just do your own projects. So I saw that as an opportunity to really delve in and engage in my research. And I would get research funds to go to Japan while I was in school. And I was making all these different works and experimenting. My first year in graduate school, I did a manga project, and every twice a semester in that program, we're supposed to do an exhibition, which is like putting artwork up on white walls. That doesn't really work for comics. My first year, all I did was I drew a manga, and then I printed out the pages and I taped them to the wall. And it's like, this isn't really an exhibition. This is just putting a book on the wall. So I was in a 3-year graduate program. I started to lean more into, since in order to graduate, I have to make something for a gallery. So our final exhibition was in a fine arts gallery. What can I do? And it can't just be taking sheets of paper and putting on the wall. That's boring. So I thought about how can I expand that and how can I make work for the space? And that's where that came from. So I started playing with animation. I learned about printing vinyl. I learned about how to combine image and text in an exhibition and use some projection and stuff like that.
As long as the core storytelling structure is there, everything remains in manga.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kofi, we talked about so many things so far. Is there anything that was important to you that we didn't really get into yet that maybe you would have liked to talk about?
I guess for the past couple of years, I've been really engaged in sort of like this US-Japan exchange space. So what's interesting is I recently, last year, I got appointed to be on the board of the US-Japan Bridging Foundation, which that was really interesting, a long time coming, because when I went back to school, you know, I was older, and after the first experience in Japan, where I super broke after that, I decided, I was like, next time I go to Japan, somebody else is paying for it. I can't afford to do that again. So I learned about scholarships and I learned about study abroad. You know, I'm an adult, so I know how to look stuff up now. So I studied abroad at Kansai Gaidai University in 2019 when I was 29.
So very close to here, actually.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, love that school. And I actually, they had a studio course on manga taught by this, another experience in cultural exchange. That course by Dr. Bamwon Koo. She is a Korean woman who was born in Germany and also speaks English and did all of her university and graduate studies in Japan.
Wow.
So she speaks 4 languages. She's a whole amalgamation of these 4, and she's teaching manga. So I thought that was really cool. So I took a course on manga there. And then I met a professor at Kyoto Seikai University, that is the premier research institution in the world for manga. And I started studying under him while I was there. And the way I was able to get to Japan was through a scholarship from the US-Japan Bridging Foundation. And that I wouldn't have been able to come back to Japan the second time without that. After I came back from getting that scholarship, I'm always thinking about being proactive and how can I move my career forward. And I was really, in my late 20s, still in school. I was feeling behind. So I was always really pushing really hard. COVID hit. And I reached out because now I'm in the newsletter for the scholarship that I got. I reached out to the director, Tom Mason of the US-Japan Bridging Foundation. And I said, hi, I'm a student. I did the scholarship program last year. I wanted to reach out with some ideas. I do these manga workshops. I know COVID hit, so we can't do anything in person. What would you think about doing like a Zoom symposium? He said, Kofi, that's a great idea. We set up a symposium with a lot of people. I talked about manga and cultural exchange. And that sort of started developing my professional relationship with Tom. Ended up getting his phone number. He invited me to Tokyo a couple of times to give some talks as sort of a example of here's what our bridging scholars are. That's actually where I met Kathy Matsui, who has been really, really big supporter of mine, who's been on this podcast. I met her a few years ago because she's a donor for the Bridging Foundation. And then last year, he actually invited me to be on the board for. So this is actually, they are the reason I was able to study abroad in Japan. So that's why it's really important for me to be on this board, because now I'm connecting. I actually just talked to one of our bridging students who's in Tokyo, and I'm gonna go meet her and get lunch with her later this week. So I see myself as like, I can help guide them as Tom and the members on the board guided me.
So for people that are interested in kind of coming to Japan on scholarships or finding kind of a place where they can talk to people for information, kind of maybe get some support. Yeah, the US-Japan kind of
the US-Japan Bridging Foundation is a really great resource. We specifically focus on lower income students who are Pell Grant recipients, yeah, we fund about 80 students a year to go to Japan all across the country. It's specifically for American students to study in Japan. And along with that, there's networking opportunities. So we don't just give them money and then they go and they come home. We stay connected with them. We meet with them. I talk to bridging students all the time. My email is open. My email address is available. So we really like to connect with our students and help them with their careers.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure all your links are in the description too, so people can find you, reach out, whether they want to learn about manga, whether they want to learn about the foundation, kind of maybe come study abroad here, or if they just have any questions relating maybe to MMA.
Great. Sure. Yeah.
Kofi, thank you so much for coming, sharing your story, sharing your experiences. It was very insightful to kind of a different take on manga, a little bit more from the academic side, from the professionalization of this in the United States, and what a manga is really about, which we certainly have learned today. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Thank you for sticking with us all the way till the end. We really appreciate it. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the podcast. It helps us improve the show and bring you more in-depth conversations from Japan. Take care and see you next time.